We all work till 2, 3 in the morning, and that's just
Yeah.
normal. That's how it goes. But in that moment, I was like, I'm alone. My partner is asleep. Like,
Mhm.
so it's those two things in combination with the fact that I was like, I don't care about this. I've got to do something.
What did success mean to you back then? And what does it
Mm.
mean to you now?
And I think this is a fear that a lot of high performers have.
What's your definition of a high performer? Hi, Victoria, and welcome to the Wellbeing Wednesday.
Thank you so much for having me. I love Wellbeing Wednesday.
It's a Thursday today, though, when we're recording this,
Yeah.
but never mind.
It's always a well-being day for us.
That's true. That's true. It's actually been a while since I've done a podcast in English, so I also need to find my way into this. I have briefly introduced you already in the intro, but I want to give our listeners a bit more context of how we actually met, because it's not the most usual story, I would say. You are American. Your home base has been Australia for quite a while. And when we met, I think that was 4 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that was an online program that we both did. I think it was Boss Babe, and there were several hundred people in there actually.
Yeah.
And somehow we connected. And I think the reason why we connected was because we both have the same background in terms of the big four.
Mm-hmm. Good
You were
old Big
still with,
Four.
yeah, you were still with PwC. And
Yeah.
I left corporate. So I was with KPMG. And I think it was also your name that you already had back then, the well balanced corporate, that sort of draw me to you. And
Mm.
yeah, I also think it was because we both had a different vision. We both thought there needs to be a different way how to work with people besides PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
And there also
Mm-hmm.
needs to be a different way how to live life. And then we drifted apart a bit. And we met again quite recently because you are in Europe as we speak. And we met in Zurich, you were passing through, and we had the most mind-blowing conversation because for you, life literally has changed in every aspect.
Yeah, it really has.
And that was so cool. So I thought I would like to talk a little bit about that. And I would like to kick us off with a question. What did success mean to you back then when we met, when you still were with PwC? And what does
Mm.
it mean to you now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think before I give the answer, I want to give some context that the definition has changed several times from, we'll call it the original iteration, which was quite stable for many years. And then it changed and changed and changed and changed to what it is now. So when I was corporate, I think I was very driven by my external success, achievement outside of myself, trying to kind of keep up with the people that I was running with and working with. And I use the term a lot in my coaching and in when I talk about my story, the treadmill. So I was on this kind of treadmill headed towards the same place as a lot of other people. And I kind of had a realization when that no longer felt good. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But success for me was really just following the path that I thought I should follow. And that was working for me until that no longer worked. And then I had kind of my moment of realization where I realized, actually don't know what feels good for me anymore. I need to figure that out because I realized if I don't want to make partner at PwC and I don't want to chase this idea of success that's been with me for so long, then what do I actually want to do? And to be quite honest with you, at the time, I had no freaking clue, but we'll go there next. And then now my definition of success is really based on how good I feel. So my most important KPI now is feeling good. And that's not always really easy when I still have parts in me. And a lot of the work I do, we talk about parts and IFS and breathwork and all of that. And I have some parts in me that are really strong and still anchored in external achievement. So they come in popping up every now and again to say, hey, are you sure that you're comfortable here? And this is where we want to be. And we still want to achieve. And I do have those achievement parts. And I encourage my clients to allow themselves to have those achievement parts or high achieving parts. I work with high performers, a full stop. And it's to help them reach their full potential in whatever it is that they decide to do, whether that's stay corporate, make partner, or go start their own business or start a family or whatever it is. But that is my definition of success now. It's how can I measure myself each day and over the long term by how good I feel and how aligned I am to my true self. And I can feel now and that's why I wanted to give the context of how much the definition has changed. Because at first the definition was very specific. It was written down almost like a mission statement.
Mm-hmm.
But because of all of the work that I've done on myself and the process that I've gone through, which I call in my coaching, bridging the gap, and we can talk more about that later too, I now have this sensitivity that I can adjust myself to be in alignment when I feel out of alignment. And that's really what success is. I like to use the phrase, if you spend your days doing things that you have to force yourself to do, you end up living a life that you've been forced to live. But if you spend your days doing things that you love to do, you end up living a life that you love to live. And that doesn't mean that you don't have to do the dishes or change diapers or review a proposal that you don't want to do or work with a client that absolutely grinds your gears. But it does mean that overall we are headed in the right direction towards alignment. So yeah, I think that I would say that's my definition now.
Love it. Yeah, I will definitely go deeper into a couple of aspects what you just shared with us, but I want to go a little bit further back. You also alluded to it that there was a moment when you realized, hey, shit, I just don't want to live like this anymore.
Yeah.
Can you take us there?
Absolutely. And I think that was a scary moment for me. And it's a scary moment that I see in my clients all the time because as a high performer, I had signed my life away, not really, but I had signed my life up to study accounting and finance and get an MBA and go on to PwC and make partner and $1 million a year. And this whole life that I had structured and built and worked so hard for. Having that first realization was a scary moment because once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And I think this is a fear that a lot of high performers have. They think I worked so hard to get where I am. What if my clients ask me this all the time? What if I decide I don't want that anymore? And the real answer is good, because then you can find out what you really do want. If you're a high performer in anything, a lawyer, an accountant, you name it, tech sales, whatever it is, you can be a high performer anywhere in a way that feels more aligned. So when I had that realization, it was 2:00 in the morning. It was COVID lockdown. The first one in Sydney was March 2020. I was working on my laptop. Lights were out. It was quite cold in my living room. My partner at the time was asleep in bed. He was in sales, so he finished his day around 5. And I was on the phone with one of my CFOs and one of my partners talking about deferred tax assets. And I was looking at the partner in his beautiful home office. I was a manager at the time. I'd been at PwC for 7 years, 5 years in New York, 2 years in Sydney by that point. And I realized, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want his life, even though he's in this beautiful home. His wife and kids are upstairs asleep. And here we are at 2 a.m. on the phone with the CFO talking about deferred tax assets. I don't want that anymore. But in the same exact breath, I was like, well, if you don't want that and you don't want to chase that anymore, what do you want? And I actually didn't know. So, and I can get into the details of kind of how I bridged my own gap in that process to move to where I am now. But yeah, that was the exact moment. And then I went on to continue at PwC for several years while I was, as I say, bridging the gap to go out on my own. And I think with high performers, I saw it in myself. I see it with my clients. Sometimes it's not so easy to take big risks because you have a lot to lose. So I think when people are at rock bottom or they're starting at zero, they have nothing to lose. So they have everything to gain. But if you're a high performer on a 6-figure salary with a promise to make partner in a couple of years and something that you've put so much effort in, it's actually a lot harder to say, you know what, I'm going to walk away from this because everything in society is saying, hey, you're doing amazing. You're making this great salary. You're successful. You're really good at your job. Why would you ever want to mess that up? So kind of going through that process for myself was interesting. And it's something I see in a lot of my clients as well.
Yeah, and I think it's not just a societal aspect. It's also this whole point of sunk costs that is hidden somewhere in the back of our heads, and we're not really aware, like we're not consciously aware of it, but that influences us so much. Because why would I put 10 years into it and then I'm almost there, but then I decide to jump out? Thank you so much for also starting this with it was scary, because it really is. And I think we often skip that part and we look at those people who somehow have transitioned into the life that we actually deep internally wish for ourselves. But the story of how they got there isn't shared too often, and that it starts off with this massive, uncomfortable fear that you also have to hold for a while. It's super important.
A long while, sometimes.
For a long while, exactly. And then doubting it over and over again, right? And not being sure, is that really light at the end of the tunnel, or isn't there?
Yeah.
I'm also curious to hear, I mean, you had this that's a super clear moment, 2 o'clock in the morning. Oh my God, I just listening to you. I have
But
so
I have
many
to, yeah.
flashbacks.
Oh my gosh. And I have to be honest as well. That was not the first or last time I worked till 2 in the morning. 2 in the morning actually sometimes wasn't that late. The difference, the kicker here was, which is good you actually followed up, because I started meditating in January, 3 months prior. I think that gave me that extra bit of awareness that I might not have had previously. Second thing, and probably even more important, was I was in my living room, not in the office, surrounded by others. For many, many years, I spent time thinking, oh, this is normal. We're all doing it.
Yeah.
We all work till 2, 3 in the morning, and that's just
Yeah.
normal. That's how it goes. But in that moment, I was like, I'm alone. My house, my partner is asleep. Like, so it's those two things in combination with the fact that I was like, I don't care about this. I've got to do something else.
Yeah, I can so much relate. And also, if I hear go the extra mile, it still triggers me even years later. But
above and beyond.
Above and beyond, exactly. All those buzzwords. But was there also something, because I think often we notice it maybe in our body first, but we don't really listen to those signs. Was there something that you have noticed even before that, physically?
Yeah. I wish that I could say I noticed it at the time, but now looking back, I can say the signs were very clear. I had lost my hair on a few occasions from stress. I had terrible hormonal acne. I lost my period for a long time. All these things, I was really stressed, but that wasn't necessarily all because of the work. It was also because of me and my lifestyle and my mindset and the way that I was running things. I was not only overworking, I was also over exercising and over socializing, and all of those things kind of put in combination. One of my favorite phrases now for myself is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I am someone who has a very high threshold of what I can do, what I can tolerate, but I have to remind myself constantly, it doesn't mean I'm good. And my body was kind of trying to show me that since I was 21, which is when I had my first internship with PwC, that I chose to do in the winter so I could earn more money and get a more realistic understanding of what busy season would be like. I was also doing my MBA at the same time. So I would kind of take on all of these things, living in New York City for the first time, doing all of these things. And then that kind of continued on. But then once I started to do the work on myself, so after this 2020 moment, I started to, what I call, this is the magical time. I started to kind of dip my toes, and it didn't feel magical for a while. The first 6 months or so was like, I have no clue what I'm fucking doing. How am I going to figure out who I am and what I want if it's not that? And I thought it was that. And what was I thinking? So did a bunch of different courses and really started to invest in the things that lit me up, even if they seemed a little bit trivial to someone who was a high performer doing really complex work with clients every day. It's hard to say, oh, well, I'm really interested in fitness, and that's what I'm going to do to fill my time, because it doesn't feel as important. So I think then by going down that path, I started to kind of dip my toes at the same time. So I had my current salary, I had the work at PwC was stable, but I also knew I wanted to figure out who I was. And I did them both in tandem. And this is what I call bridging the gap for myself and for my clients. It's like a really special time where you have your career, you're doing really well in your career still, but you're no longer really tying your self-worth up in that career, which is the sweet spot, because then I was able to explore myself more deeply at the same time. I ended up changing roles and going through all these things. I guess to answer your question, the real sign in my body came when I was leaving. I had left the assurance practice and I had gone into an internal role. I was doing people and culture work, which was a lot more meaningful for me, and I enjoyed a lot more. But I had started my coaching business on the side, and I kind of realized the work I was doing with PwC wasn't really aligned anymore, and I wanted to go full time into my coaching business. So when I brought that to them, they said, no worries, stay with us 3 days a week. We'll give you these projects to work on. And I had this real visceral reaction in my stomach. It was like a pit in my stomach. And I thought, because I was happy. I liked my team. I liked the work I was doing. So I want to say that as well. If I don't leave, I'm not going to become the person I want to become. I have to honor that. So that was the time that I had a sign in my body that I actually took. But I think it's important to recognize that I had signs in my body the whole way, but I wasn't awake to that. I wasn't in the space to identify them or know what they were really trying to tell me, because I wasn't really connected to my true self, my intuition, my inner knowing, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, also can relate very much to that. You said your KPI now is your own well-being or your state of well-being. What do you think we as society, maybe also in corporate, do get wrong about well-being today? What's the misconceptions that we
Yeah,
still
few
have?
things. Few things. I guess from a corporate standpoint, or what I've seen is we try, or they try, to address well-being on a collective level, a group level, rather than an individual level. Even now, when I pitch to corporates or I have conversations, they want something that's going to fit the whole team. They want something that's going to work for everyone.
Mm.
And because it works for everyone, it means it really works for no one. Well-being is so niche, so specific to every single person. And I understand corporates might not have the time to invest that kind of energy into people, but they're not necessarily giving their people the tools to invest in and figure it out themselves. Because, like I said, when I had that moment in 2020, I had two clear choices in front of me. One was you've got an MBA in accounting and finance, you've given 7 years to this firm, you're about to make senior manager, you know you're going to make partner. It's all here for you. Babe, stay the course. Just stay the course. And then there was another part that was like, no, actually, go and figure it out. And I kind of messily figured out those resources. But if we can find a way to help people bridge that gap and figure out those resources, they can actually show up so much better at work. So when I made that choice, I think it's quite easy for people to think, oh, well, then she just said, I don't care about work anymore. I'm going to do, I was actually performing even better at work. I had all this excess energy. I started doing things for me that I wasn't doing in the past. And then I was also inspiring my teams. I got top rated. I got promoted to senior manager. It all happened, but I was no longer like in the cage of my own mind that I couldn't be well and work really well at the same time, because I realized what my prerogatives were and what my prerogatives weren't. So if someone else was going to stay in the office till midnight, that no longer was a narrative in my head of, hey, if you don't stay till midnight, you're not a team player and they're going to be upset with you. My prerogative was actually, he needs that or she needs that. If they want to stay till midnight, that's their thing. Doesn't work for me. I'm going to go home so I can get up at 5 tomorrow and go for my swim or go for my bicycle ride or do whatever I need to do before I come into the office so I can show up in my best way. And I think that that's something people get wrong too, is I think they have to do whatever it is everyone else around them is doing.
Definitely. And actually, because that's very interesting to me. So I know what you mean and I hear you. However, if I look back at my corporate time here in Europe, in particular in the UK, my dad was maybe a little bit better, but over here in the DACH region, I think there's still to this day a lot of judgment if you you are judged of not being a team player, or people start ask you if you now work part-time, if you leave at 6 and don't hang on. And do you think Australia has a different picture drawn already? Is that something that has been happening, or was it a coincidence that you happen to be in that team? Or where do we start to really, because I mean, what you just described is if I want to stay in corporate and I want to thrive there, but I thrive if I can do my sports, if I can see my family at a time, like if that doesn't stress me out and I actually perform better, then that should be the narrative, right?
That should be, absolutely. And I think it can be with the right level of communication. I know it's different culture. And I think to answer your question, when I left New York to go to Australia, I remember it being like, oh, you're going to go on a little tour to Australia and it's going to be fun and cute. And then you'll come back to New York and you'll do the real work and you'll make partner and you'll really happen. Like that was the story that people told me, that I told myself. It was like I was going on a little play date, like a little holiday.
Interesting.
And then I got to Australia and I was working a lot. Like I was working really hard. It's just the pressure was different. And how I always described this was the partner came to say thank you to me on the weekend when I was in the office. And I had not really experienced that before. I was always treated really well. And we had really great camaraderie in all of my teams at PwC, which is why I worked till 4 a.m. for 7 years. Sometimes of the year, I didn't mind it. I've been in 4 weddings, 5 weddings, 4 of those weddings are from girls I met at PwC. They're like my best friends. Like my goddaughter is the baby of someone I met at PwC. So lots of really great things. But in Australia, I think the lifestyle is a little bit different. People work hard, but they also go for their surf. They go for their workout. They go for a run at lunch. That is quite normal there. So I will say that they are ahead of the curve in that way, but then they also still have similar struggles with well-being that we see in the US. And I'm not too across Europe yet. I've just arrived, but I assume similar.
Interesting. But now let's go back to the gap that you bridged, and let's start with how you did that for you, and what was the process? What were the tools? Also, how long did it take? And then also, what are you offering today to your clients?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think the way to start answering this question is to recognize that high performers, high achievers, wherever we are in the world, have really strong parts of us that care about achievement. And it's not about killing off those parts. I know there are some schools of thought that would say, connect with yourself and be one with the universe and let go of material possessions. And I know that that all exists, and I'm sure there's a place for that, and that's really beautiful. They forget there's a process to get to that. So if I was a corporate high performer, I love the term you use, sunk costs, because that was something that played in my head for a long time. And even my parents were like, oh my gosh, we sent you for college and all the money, and that you got an MBA and you did all these things, and now you're just going to leave it all behind. The most important part of the process in bridging the gap is giving that high performing part of us something to chew on. So something to say, this is structured, this works, I know I can see and feel the benefits, rather than saying, trust the process. For a high performer, what is the process? They want to know. I want to know what the process is, and I want to notice the results quite quickly. And that was my exact process. It was, okay, what do I really enjoy doing? Let me try that. Build up my energy. Next thing you know, I had all this extra energy because I was creating energy buffers here, there, and everywhere. That actually doing my day job was really easy.
What's an energy buffer, Victoria? What's an energy buffer? I think that's super important.
Yeah. So if I knew I had something that I had to do, a task or a meeting or something that I really didn't enjoy doing, I would put an energy buffer on either side. So whether that's a walk or I catch up with a friend or 5 minutes in the sun, it doesn't have to be long, but I would actually plan that out. Like, okay, every time I speak to this person, I feel drained, or I've got this really technical client issue that I have to face and it's going to take energy from me. So afterwards, I'm going to go and do something to make myself feel a bit better and continue on with my day. Because what I had done in the past and what I see often with my clients is you just jump from thing to thing to thing because we think we have to. No one is managing my diary. I am managing my diary. And if I'm not going to take the time for myself, no one's going to take it for me. And I think that that goes back to the putting the onus on the individual to prioritize their well-being and figure out what works for them. And I think that also kind of then answers that separate question about culture and corporates. And I think that when corporates are requiring people to work a lot of hours, there's just a lack of trust. And they kind of, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? I'm not sure, but it's kind of a circular process. So I think for me, when I was going through the bridging the gap, and when I take my clients through bridging the gap, it's specific steps of things. First, we're going to build your energy. Then we're going to get you feeling different. Then we're going to figure out what it is that you really care about. So we go through a process called Zone of Genius. What is it that other people see about you that shines? Okay, now how can we put more of that into your life? And then we do a lot of work on parts work. So you've got high performing parts of yourself. Maybe there's perfectionist parts. Most likely, definitely there's perfectionist parts. There's also parts that sometimes I see. The most common thing I see in high performers is polarizing parts. One that is a high performing perfectionist, wants to go, do everything perfectly, be everything to everyone. And then one that wants to do nothing. Like nothing. Sit on the couch, stare at the wall, nothing. They both have the same goal most of the time. It's just the process of getting each person to realize that is to protect the person, to make them the most successful version, best version of themselves. They just have a completely different process of getting it. One is saying we need to go. We're going to fall behind. And the other one is saying we need to stop. We need to slow down or we're going to get sick and burn out. Both these parts don't like each other because the one that wants to go and be perfect and do everything looks at the one that wants to sit on the couch and relax and thinks they're lazy. And then the one that's lazy or wants to do nothing is looking at the other one thinking he or she's crazy. Can't believe. Yeah. And if we can find a way to make them be friends or realize that they're on the same page, we call this parts integration, to move forward from that. So I think bridging the gap, the highlight, if you take anything from this, is giving your high performing parts something to chew on. They're going to need to notice tangible, real results in the way that you feel, the way you show up, the way people notice you. Look at the sparkle in your eyes. If you take a photo of yourself and then you start to do things that make you feel good, your eyes are going to change. That's a big thing too.
And how long does it take to bridge the gap? Can you say
Yeah.
something about that, or is it super different for everybody?
Super different for everybody, but I really honestly think that the change, you can notice the change and the energy builds within like the first couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, it just feels like it's happening. But then you get to where am I now? Yeah, 5 years from my moment of awakening, where then I stayed for a long time. I was still doing the same work. I didn't change roles until 2022, January. So that was 2 more years. I had time off. I went traveling. I did all these courses at the same time. I started teaching indoor cycling. I was doing my role and I was still doing things on the outside. That was my sweet spot. Those are some of the best years of my life. I look back and think about the way I felt, the way things were going. I had a great career. I was doing well. I had all my friends at PwC by my side. I was doing all this great stuff outside of work, discovering myself. So that was 2 years, but it didn't feel like 2 years. It felt like it was just happening quite naturally. So I think once we start building the bridge, the common question for a high performer is, okay, well, I'm building this bridge, but I don't know where I'm going. That's okay. It's not like, okay, I'm here and I'm going to build the bridge to that island. I can see it there and I know exactly where it's going to be and what it's going to look like. That's part of it too. But by giving those high performing parts something to chew on, as I say, maybe I need a better analogy for that. They stop asking for the end destination so frequently and start just kind of going along with the motions of what it looks like to do that and keeping yourself in check. So I think we never finish the bridging the gap process because we realize that we are the gap and our life is the gap that we're kind of on a journey to, but it's just getting enough momentum to start the process for a high performer is different than for people who don't have those parts. And I think that's something important to note too is for high performers, we tend to think everybody's a high performer. That's the thing that I have. I look at someone and I think everyone's a high performer. Not everyone has those parts, those desires, those wishes, and I think it's important to honor that in ourselves.
What's your definition of a high performer for everybody who's listening now and thinking, this could be me? What's the definition?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think there are some people who are, I would never identify as a high performer.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good sign that you are because you hold yourself to such high standards. They're like, I could never call myself a high performer. So I love this question. When I first was talking about the term high performer, we had ratings in the big four. I'm sure they're all similar. And a high performer was one of the ratings back in the day when I first started. And I was like, okay, I'm a high performer, but I'm only a high performer because they say I'm a high performer. And that means that I'm doing all the things and meeting their criteria. And then several years later, I looked and said, I'm actually a high performer in my life. I'm not just a high performer at work because I do all the things that they say. I plan holidays. I go here. I get things done. I make things happen. So a high performing person is someone who, in my mind, someone who shows up in their full capacity in their life holistically. So that's why my course is called the Holistic High Performer, which is I show up for my family. I show up for my relationship. I show up for my holidays that I want to have. I really have the capacity and the way to figure it out and get it done. And I think that's what makes someone a high performer. And they can feel that and see that in translation in their lives. So don't wait for your company to call you a high performer. Mm-hmm. You get to decide if you're a high performer.
Yeah. And what do you recommend a person who now or has already known, yeah, that's me, I'm a high performer. I also noticed this fear that you've alluded to. What kind of message do you have for them right now? What can they do? Where can they start?
Yeah, by going inward, have a look at yourself. And then that can be a number of different things. And I think people sometimes think there's one answer. And that was when I was a high performer, I was still a high performer. When I was a corporate high performer, I thought, okay, I have to hire the best coach and I have to go on the best retreat and I have to do the best holistic health practitioner who's going to fix all of my problems. And I only want the best. And that was my perfectionist part. And I also have a maximizer part that's like, if it's not the best, I don't want it. So I think that's the first thing is letting go of a little bit of that and being willing to try something new. Meditation, like I said, that was my first, I started practicing Vedic meditation in 2020, January. That was my little bit of awareness because I started to create space between reaction and what was happening in front of me. I remember being in meetings, watching people and thinking, oh my gosh, they're all moving so quickly, like chickens with their heads cut off. And then they would look at me and be like, what do you think? And I'm like,
I don't
and it
know.
was just
Yeah.
happening in slow mo, or like things started to happen in slow motion that I could see. And that was my extra bit of awareness. Another thing that works really well for high performers is breath work. And that's why I use a lot of breath work in my coaching. Because what happens with breath work is that thinking, high performing, busy mind comes offline. It's called the prefrontal cortex, comes offline when we do breath work in certain ways. There's a whole host of scientific reasons behind that we won't get into now, but trying to really find ways that you can explore yourself more deeply, get connected to your true self. Sound bath, also really great. But carving out time to figure out what it is that actually lights you up and makes you happy, and not being ashamed to go and prioritize that, even if the people around you aren't prioritizing that. Because at the end of the day, our definition of success, or my definition of success, is I'm on my own treadmill. I'm no longer on the treadmill of everyone else. Now, that doesn't mean that when I stepped off that treadmill that I wasn't like, oh shit. I had a lot of oh shit moments, like, oh, they're all still going and they're moving forward and they're looking at me like, oh, she's giving up the dream. What's she doing? Like, it's all true. It's all true. Like, but you just find yourself a support network, whether it's a coach or a mentor or other friends or people who are doing it as well, who can remind you that life is all about your treadmill, your alignment, your happiness, your KPIs, whatever those are for you. And if you don't know what they are, the best way to find out what they are is to really to get connected with yourself. And if you don't know how to do that, reach out to me. I'll give you some ways to do that, or slow down. That's probably the first thing. Slow down.
Yeah, you have to go slow if you want to go fast, right?
Yeah. And high performers don't believe that. I was the girl who was, if it wasn't Barry's or Soul Cycle, like Shavasana at the end of a yoga class, like
you would skip
I was out of there. I was out of there. I don't need this. I got to go get changed to get back to my desk. So you have to find ways to convince yourself that it's worth it. And that's what I mean. Give the high performing part something to chew on. That's like, hey, actually, this is worth my time. Cool. I'll do it.
So in your own day-to-day rhythm now, what are your go-to tools to protect your nervous system on the one hand, but then also your focus on the other hand?
Yeah, great question. And I think, as we talked about when we saw each other in Zurich a couple of days ago, my life has changed so much that I went from having complete certainty to having almost no certainty, which is a beautiful thing because I have a lot of freedom and flexibility. But it also means that my nervous system can still get dysregulated. And I think people think when you're in corporate and you're really busy and doing all these things, it's a different type of nervous system regulation. And I think the first step is knowing when my nervous system is not regulated, which I have a lot of awareness on now. And what I've seen in my clients and in the work that I do is most high performing people's nervous system is not regulated and they have no idea, because that goes back to that original, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
High performers. That's a quote that we should all have written on our computer screens.
Yeah.
My tools are breath work. So I do breath work often. One of my favorite practices is actually heart coherence breathing, which is you can find a YouTube video or something that gives you 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out through the nose. Because I find for myself, I run a quite high stress body, which is something, again, I wasn't aware of back in the day. But if you've been listening to this podcast, you can probably put the things together that that's just how I am. So for me, slowing down breath work is better than the fast breathing, the ramping up. I do once a month a breakthrough breath work, which is fast breathing. And that just really helps me blow out the cobwebs, shed layers of myself that are kind of getting in the way, really get connected to my true self. That's when my prefrontal cortex comes offline. I still meditate almost every day. And I have practices where I slow down. I let myself really slow down. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't go weeks without pulling a tool out of my toolkit. And I think that's something that we have to be honest about too, is you can have all the tools in the toolkit. I've got plenty of tools. That doesn't mean I always pull them out. That means sometimes I sit there and feel sad for myself, or let myself feel I always call it the like adrenaline rush in my chest, which I used to be so addicted to, like running around. People need me. I've got things to do. And I notice that comes back into me sometimes now. And it does feel good to feel that way. But it's finding ways to get, now I have this in my process of changing my definition of success, in my process of bridging the gap. I've also really increased my sensitivity in my mind, in my body, in my emotions. So when I can start to see those things shifting, then I get a real cue or a kick from myself. Sometimes it's a little nudge and I pull the tool out and I use it. And sometimes it's a bigger kick and it's like, okay, wait, what's happening here? I need to use my tool. So I love to say that because I think people beat themselves up if they're like, yeah, but I know breath work and I know yoga, but I don't go, or I have the gym pass, but I skip. Or you have to find ways to prove to yourself that it's worth it. And if that's not working for you, find a different process, find a different rhythm.
Yeah. And that's also something, because you said, I know. That's a phrase I keep hearing so much, because we know so much and there is so much knowledge out there, and there is another podcast and there is another training and there is another post that I save. But this part that you keep referring to, like this going slow, we need to go slow so that we can integrate what we have learned. I mean, that's also skipping Shavasana, right? We are doing Shavasana after a yoga practice so the body can integrate. It's not just a nice lying around ritual for the teacher.
Exactly.
It's not that. It's to integrate the practice, and we need that. Our body needs it, our brain needs it, and to honor that and give that space, I think is so important, because
I think so too.
We're not lacking knowledge. We have it all.
Especially high performers, we have access to everything. And I think with the Shavasana example, it's like, well, I'm just laying there and thinking about my grocery list or my to-do list anyway. So I'm not going to do it. Or meditation, I'm not going to meditate because I'm just sitting there thinking about all the things that I could be doing.
That annoyed me.
Still do it. Just stay there. Do it. But I think that's also goes back to that, the parts work and the two polarizing parts, and finding a way to put those parts together and say, okay, how are we going to find something that works for both, that we can step forward into our fullest potential, which by my definition is living the life that you kind of were always meant to live, even if it's scary, or even if it's not aligned with what you had signed up for, or your sunk cost, or whatever you want to call it. It's actually just being aware of that and then taking those steps towards it with your tools.
I love that. And of course, you know that anyways, but we're putting all the links to connect with you, but also to look into your work. These are all below in the show notes. So if you want to get to know more or dive into, please feel free to do so. We are already coming to the end of this conversation, even though I could keep going because there's so many things we haven't touched upon. There is one question that every guest gets. And that question is, you meet your younger self. What advice would you have for her?
That's a really, really good question. I think I would say, let yourself enjoy your life, because life is to be enjoyed. I think when I was younger, I thought, work hard now, retire and enjoy later. And I think that that's really part of the American dream or the American essence. And maybe there's a lot of other people in the world that think that too. But now that I know, the more fun I'm having, the better I feel, the more I'm looking at that as my KPI, the better my life is holistically. And I used to think that if it wasn't hard, if it wasn't intense, if I wasn't putting in the work, I wasn't doing it right. And I really believed that. I used to pride myself on, I'll outwork anyone, so it's fine. I'll just work hard. But had I just let myself have that enjoyment, things would have been a lot easier for me. And I don't regret anything that I did. And I've learned a lot in the process. And I wouldn't be able to speak to high performers the way I do now had I not lived that life. But I think that's what I would say to her.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much for your time and also talking about your story and your experiences. And maybe you'll be back here soon and then we can dive even deeper.
Yeah, amazing. I hope people find it helpful, and I look forward to connecting again and maybe doing an event or something together in Zurich.
Definitely. We should do that. Thank you, Victoria.
Thanks, Elvira.